Welcome to another edition of the Business Brains and the Bottom Line podcast. My name is Paul Delegru, your host. My guest today is Max Henderson from Pondurance. Welcome to the show, Max.
Thank you.
Well, Max, to give the listener a little background, you're an industry vet in cybersecurity, but you're really focused on digital forensics and incident response. So, people in technology kind of know what you do a little bit, but give a little bit of a definition of what that is, and then we'll kind of expand from there. That way some non-technical listeners can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the easiest way to start with it is, the things you see in the news, hospital getting hacked, right? Getting held hostage, ransom. That's exactly what we do, right? That's the situation that we find ourselves in, running multiple at a time. Really, our focus, though, is to be there virtually. Used to be boots on the ground, now virtually. That's pretty cool. Really finding out how they got hacked into. These things, you see the hospital is completely offline. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Usually the hacker was in there for weeks or sometimes months prior to that, planning their moves, working towards, positioning themselves with very powerful usernames and passwords and computers to really pull off and inflict the most damage. So we figure out how they get in. We help get them out. And then especially on the hospital front or anything that has regulated data, figuring out who the victims are, right? What patient's data was accessed? Was it stolen? Was it exfiltrated? Who's the criminal group? Who's behind this? Attribution is huge for us. And applying intelligence to that and understanding what they're going to do with the info, understanding how they're going to extort it, and then making sure that we leave the place better than we found it, I think is key there.
Yeah, so what are the common ways the bad guys get in? I know there's kind of spoofing. You hear all these terms thrown out there, phishing, spoofing. Run through a few of those for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really changed over the years. So it used to be, and it still is prominent, but you get the email attachment, right? Somebody opened the email attachment, they ran it, and a program runs in the background, right? Or they convince somebody to give up their username and password to type it in the phishing attack. A lot of the issues now, though, are stemming back to kind of IT best practices. A lot of times what we're seeing is that something wasn't updated, right? You get your iPhone, you get your security update, and you run that. Well, if you're running an enterprise that really relies on a lot of applications that are on the internet, anybody in the world can send traffic to that, right? The login portal to get into a hospital is on the internet. Somebody in Russia often can proxy their way through and do it. So they're exploiting that, and like I said, it kind of takes a few weeks often to kind of move throughout. But we always like to find that point of entry and the true root cause.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, and our company is a IT consulting company, so we deal with a lot of security. The human factor is the biggest threat vector from everything I've seen and heard between my own, research and just my customers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this just came up in a conference recently, and I mean, in all ways that you look at it, it is the human factor. But people often think that, it's because the human fell to a phishing attack, right? Well, it's also a human that forgot to update the device for the past 2 years, right? So no matter how you tie it back, it's always going to be a human mistake.
Yeah. So, you hear a lot of who are the most common targets, do you think? I mean, you see a lot of the big ones on TV, like nation state attacks and this and that. But is that changing, or is that kind of still prevalent? The most prevalent, I should say.
Yeah, I think 10 years ago, there's the term APT, right? Advanced Persistent Threat, and it was almost exclusively the Chinese government, the Russian government, and the U.S. government.
Really?
And then everything else was commodity. But over time, the skill set over there, and really talking about Eastern Europe, has grown exponentially. Yeah. And so what used to be 10 years ago considered only a nation state skill set is now these massive criminal enterprises that are doing it.
What about all the social media platforms as far as like Facebook and TikTok and Twitter and all the other ones out, the Instagram, are those threat vectors as well? How does that work?
Yes, in a lot of ways. So if you think about the ways that people can reach out to you, and now you're getting into, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of AI.
Right.
You can use AI to basically pull all information about somebody. So go and collect everything that I need to pull off a fraudulent attack against Max Henderson. And it's going to give you my relatives. It's going to give you the school I went to. And so you can form these messages and convince them, oh, you went to this middle school, right? And then lead that to a trusting relationship where you may convince them to download something or download a link or click on something. So those are vectors themselves. But there's also concerns over privacy and there's crimes against children and all sorts of things. It's another surface area, I think, that really just exposes us on a direct level to communicate with them.
Yeah. So obviously you deal with a lot of different companies. I mean, what are some of the things customers, end users can do to protect themselves? I know that's such a broad answer, but what are you seeing out there, and what are the best practices?
Yeah, I think first best practice is for the non-technical folks. So understanding that phishing training and all the videos that you watch, they're pretty accurate on what you would expect. I actually, I still learn things when I watch those. So
Sure.
Latest techniques, but the first thing that I tell people is the multi-factor authentication. So not just thinking about protecting a hospital, but protecting yourself, protecting your bank account, protecting anything that is critical for you to be able to log into, even your social media. You look at how many times have we seen somebody's Instagram get hacked, right?
Yeah.
In almost all those cases, they don't have that multi-factor on. So whether that's even just texting a code to you or using an app that kind of generates codes on the fly.
Yeah, Authenticator or something like that.
Yeah. And we're seeing, those still get bypassed, right? Those still get beat all the time.
Well, I got to admit, Max, so all my banking, all that stuff is multi-factor now. And I remember at the beginning, I used to get annoyed by it. No, I got to do it too. Now I'm actually thankful for it, to be honest. I've changed my whole attitude on it. It's like, okay, they're protecting me. I get that, right? All my, investments, all that stuff is multi-factor. So I think people have to change their attitude about that and don't look at it as an annoyance, but just what we have to do to protect ourselves. So you touched on it a little earlier. I got to believe AI is going to be probably is a big part of the bad guys' strategy, right? Getting to accelerate what they do, right? It's got to be a big portion of their strategy.
Yeah, in different ways. I heard an attorney recently, describe AI as, especially ChatGPT, as a sous chef, right? It's not powerful enough to where it replaces the chef, but it does help you prepare everything that you might need. And so related to hacking, I mentioned the fraud side of it, right? And that's scary, but there's skill sets that are very tough to have that AI helps you out with. So one is writing malware code, right? Writing all these programs, it can save you a lot of time and give you skills that you didn't previously have. So I haven't seen it too much on, forming a malware payload through AI effectively that bypasses antivirus or anything like that. But
you never know, right?
It's
coming. Yeah.
It's coming. There's a lot of automation right now with AI and like business email compromises, being able to propagate, know who to target, how to target, and the whole backend chain.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of getting off track a little bit. You mentioned ChatGPT. I use that all the time. Like, I do. Like, I'll give you a simple example. Someone sends me an email, a difficult email, and I want to respond to them. And I'm like, how do I respond to them? I've been just plugging in and saying, this is kind of what I want to say. And they kind of wordsmith it and put it in an eloquent form. I'm like, okay, that just saved me about an hour. No, and I try to make it sound like I would say it, but the premise of it, I love that tool.
Yeah, I personally haven't used it that much. I've watched people use it, but if you're going to use it, double check what it's
Oh yeah,
writing for you before you actually send it out.
Yeah, I wouldn't just cut and paste. You got to, because it makes mistakes, or it says something you may not really weren't trying to say, and so you definitely got to correct it.
Mm-hmm.
So in your business, obviously you're on the detection and the and response side of things and remediation, all that. I always wondered this. What's the percentage of actual detections that really turn into events? And I hope I said that right.
Yeah. Well, I would say that every case, so we're always walking in, something's happened, right? For me to
Yeah.
for me to show up, something's happened. And what we
You're
always
the fixer, right? You're like in the movies. You're the fixer, but you don't come in with a gun, though.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Hindsight,
Yeah, there you go.
But every matter, there is always something that was missed. There was a trigger, there was a notification, there was some sort of detection somewhere along the lines that either no one's watching or they wrote it off or they just hadn't gotten to it yet because they're too busy. But I mean, it does take time. There is, for every, it's easy for me to point that out, right? But there's
Sure.
also thousands or hundreds often of alerts that are there, and they're usually completely irrelevant. I think where a lot of people go wrong, though, is in these incidents, they realize something happened, and then they're like, "Oh crap! Every alert matters," and so then they start firing on every cylinder, trying to.
Yeah, you overcompensate the other direction at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And then they find themselves off track, and then they exhaust themselves, and they can no longer help me because they spent 10 hours on that.
And obviously not to give your company a shameless plug, but we do business with you guys, a great company. Having a company like yours that manages that platform for you, so they're actually managing the detections and the responses and all that. How does that help from a percentage base? In other words, Joe Smith does it on his own versus hiring a company like yours, like an MDR company like yours. What are the percentages that increase the odds of detecting these and remediate them in a better and timely fashion?
Yeah, to run it in house, it's hard, man.
We know that we.
24 by
It's
7.
kind of a leading question. I think I knew the answer to this one, but it was a leading question because it just big companies that try to do it themselves. It's tough.
Yeah, you get into like the Fortune 100, they're doing it, right? But they still have a third party who's helping them out.
Yeah.
But it's the small and medium businesses. They just it's often a catch-22 because some are so small that they don't even have the funds to pay somebody to monitor, right?
Yep.
And then they also don't have the personnel to monitor. Those are the ones that are really tough situations to walk into.
Yeah.
By far, the majority do not have monitoring going on.
Right. No, you raise a good point. We sell to the same guys you sell to, and one of the things we get a little leery of is we try not to focus on the teeny tiny customers. They have needs too, though. But if they don't have an IT staff and they just got like someone doubling as a computer guy,
yeah, that's always the case.
It's tough. We're like, do we want to get involved in this? Because we're going to become their help desk. They're going to be calling us 10 times a day for, hey, the computer's not running, or the printer's not on, or something like that. So it's you raise a good point. These small companies, they're kind of in between. They really need it, but a lot of them think they can't afford it either until they get hit with something. Yeah,
people think so. We talk about when we go through like insurance carriers and law firms and trying to understand, what are you capable of? Are you comfortable in a larger company? I'm way more comfortable the larger the company is. The worst situation in IR, incident response, is when there is one IT person. Right. And I say, hey, we need to track down this laptop. They say, all right, well, I got to drive 4 hours today to this office because I'm the only IT guy. Those are the toughest ones to respond to.
Yeah. Anything can happen in 4 hours, right?
Yeah.
So how does cybersecurity insurance come into this? Like, how does that protect the customer? I know, or what do the customers have to do to get cyber insurance? Because I know that's the other part of it too. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate when we walk into a ransomware matter and the customer does not have backups and they cannot pay the ransom, and they're just stuck in this catch-22 again, where And that's where the insurance matters are so much easier to work with when we do know that we have that backing and the carrier and the law firms. We do this every day. It's easy. We see the same people. So what I would say is that it is difficult to get those cyber policies, but if you're caught without one, you are screwed.
Yeah.
If you don't have that ability to recover.
You just have to pay at that point.
Yeah, or sometimes the ransom demand is so high you can't pay.
Yeah.
And we've had where they just, with the two IT people, just go and rebuild every single computer.
Yeah. So what do you think the percentages of these go unreported? Because no one wants to be in the news, right? It's embarrassing. And, to get your name on the news, never good.
So for ransomware, I think I saw a talk that the FBI did where they found that when they took down the Hive, they only knew of 33% of victims because they were able to get to the Hive's infrastructure and see who the victims were. But on ransomware, most victims are known because they shame them on their wall. They list them, and it's getting scraped, and there's all these different reporters and websites who are scraping from that and monitoring. So ransomware, I think we have a lot of visibility into that. Business email compromise. So somebody falls victim to a phishing attack. There's often a wire fraud transfer. A lot of those go unreported.
That's a big one, I think. I've seen that a lot. I mean, I've just, we've gotten some of those too at our company. And so we have awareness training. So I'm pretty kind of, got my antennas up all the time, and anything's even remotely suspicious, I hit the report button. But again, you're relying on a human to do that.
Yeah. So if you walk into a matter where a wire fraud was done, they're usually going to report it, and because they want the money back, right?
Right.
If there is just a victim user whose email was hacked and they send out emails, like let's say they send out 1,000 emails, people will just change the password. I've walked into many matters where finally that wire fraud does happen. They said, "Oh, this is our 5th one this year." Well, why weren't we here before? This all stems from it. We traced it to it. They said, "Oh, we just thought it was a phishing attack, and we just changed the password." Do you think a criminal just went out of their way to send 1,000 emails with no goal? Right? There's a goal. You're responding. You're playing whack-a-mole to that action
Right.
because it's the only one you see. But there's a lot more going on underneath.
Yeah. Now, are there, you've been doing this a long time, and you're kind of one of the, quote, I hate to call people experts, but you're an expert, let's face it. What are the new trends out there? I mean, we mentioned a few, like, phishing and all those types of spoofing, things of that sort. What are the new ones out there? What are the latest and greatest?
Yeah, it's the same one over and over again. It's in ransomware attacks, it's the IT management tools. So things like Screen Connect from ConnectWise, they're here in Tampa. I see it on probably half my cases. And antivirus thinks it's a legitimate IT management tool, and it just lets it go. I think I just did this research, actually. You can do a 14-day free trial with no credit card down and get a backdoor, basically.
Really?
Yeah, Screen Connect, full. You can remote in, you can upload, download files. Why do I need to go write this crazy complex malware or pay somebody for their malware if I can just log into this website and get a free one that blends in, that antivirus lets go? It's amazing to me. Now, I will say, as a responder, I like the logging that it has because it is a commercial tool, so it logs everything.
Yeah.
But we're just seeing it's so effective in everything.
So if someone was to come to you and say, "Hey, man, what are the minimum requirements I need to have?" What would they be?
Yeah, I think antivirus EDR is an easy answer, but not just having it, but looking at it. Or having somebody monitor.
Well, now you're touching on a big subject where you can have all the tools you want, but if you're not using them, if you're not deploying, monitoring them, they're no good.
Yeah, that's the big thing. All these tools, we've walked into cases where they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on tools, and it generated every alert. It did its job, but nobody looked. Nobody logged in. That you have obviously multi-factor authentication. We're having issues with seeing a lot of push to approve. And so if you think about, you log into your email, your phone pops up, says, "Was this you?" Press yes, right? That is being abused a lot. Multi-factor fatigue is what they're calling it.
Yeah.
Uh, and then patching. So a lot of these vulnerabilities, you look at Citrix, you look at specifically the NetScaler ones. You had all these ones going back to why can't I think of the component that was within the code? I responded to so many of those. I know it's hit like VMware Horizon View and whatnot, and the Exchange. So all these 0-day vulnerabilities hits, but they're not exploited right away. And there's that time range where they have the opportunity to update and they don't, and then eventually they become a victim.
I'm looking at things like, logging, and is logging enabled? I mean, sometimes I would guess that customers don't even turn that on. Am I accurate on that?
So I will give Microsoft credit. They are enabling a lot by default that was not previously.
Yep.
But that noise level makes logs roll over. So now you're getting more logs generated, but you're not centralizing them anywhere.
Right.
And then they're just gone. There's a lot of cases that we do where if you don't have, for example, the security logon events, being able to track where that threat actor came from, some cases end up inconclusive on origin, on root cause, because either they clean their tracks or you don't have the logs necessary to trace it back.
Yeah.
If they were generated, they just weren't retained.
And a lot of these threats are coming from overseas, Russia, China still. And what can we do? I mean, okay, I find out it's Joe Smith in, China somewhere. I can't get to him. Once he's got the money and nothing you can do, right? Or the data, right?
It's funny. I just did a panel in Beverly Hills, and one of the individuals was sharing how indictments go out all the time, right? And you indict them, and then they're in Russia. That's the common one, right? Well, these people like to travel. They make their money off ransomware. They make it in the winter, and then summer comes around. They're like, "Let's go somewhere. Let's go somewhere." And there was two couples. One went to Germany, and he was saying that the wife posted to Instagram that they were in Germany, and they were being monitored, and they came right to that resort. And,
Unbelievable. What a dumbass.
yeah, I think
I mean,
another one was in I think Switzerland or something.
unbelievable. Why would that's just maybe the wife wasn't involved in that side of the business though. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe she thought her husband was an accountant or something, and
Probably had a public Instagram.
yeah, unbelievable. So, well, I know in your 9 or 10 years at Pondurance, you must have seen, a million different cases in all shapes and sizes. Love to hear about some of the stories and some of the, either the most ridiculous ones down to the mundane ones. And of course, we will keep the names of the companies out of this we don't want to get you fired. So,
Yeah, well, there are ones that have been great experiences working with the people, but just really complex tactics by the threat actor. There's been other ones where the customer did us no favors, and
yeah,
I think the first one that is public that Pondurance was involved in was the Hancock Regional Hospital, one that made 60 Minutes. That was very dear to me, taking that 3 a.m. call years ago, and really a great episode on there that their CEO Steve walks through everything that he saw in the experience. And one of the things that he highlights there is ambulance diversion, and not specific to Hancock, what I'm saying right now, but understanding the pressure that you're under as an incident responder to get ambulances off diversion. So it's very common that if we are operating in an incident response and a hospital's been hit, if they're on diversion, there could be 30, 45-minute delays in the county for ambulances getting to hospitals because they can't accept anything below whatever it is, severity 1, right? And so understanding that there are life and death situations is really tough to be thorough on your analysis, but also aware that the decisions and the recommendations that I give really, really matter and really could have a life and death outcome. On a much lighter note, I've had cases where IT is writing threatening notes to the actor on the desktop, right? And then all of a sudden I see the threat actor get a little bit more dedicated and a little bit more ambitious to kind of carrying out their attack. So if you do find yourself in that situation, please do not write notes threatening the attacker.
All you're doing is going to embolden them, right?
Yeah. I mean, these are people too. They're criminals. There's often ego involved with those criminals, and they're not scared to ramp it up if they have to. But some of the other stories, kind of like that, when you're in a pre-ransomware situation, right? So they haven't quite pulled off their attack, but they are invested from a time perspective, and they're on the cusp of getting their money through that ransomware execution. So if you get there right before they execute and try to push them out, they will fight back. They will try to really claw their way through, and sometimes you can embolden them into early execution, right? So maybe they didn't get to every system, but they're just going to take what they have. So we had one situation where we had mapped it all out. We understood how to take everything down in one fell swoop, and we took it all down. And what happened is that out of nowhere, we start seeing activity again. And I'm thinking, this is impossible. Like, we just shut off the firewall. Like, there's no network connections. I'm pinging the server. There's nothing. And what we found out is that all these remote offices had these rogue access points. They had their own Wi-Fi up, right? So the computers were connected to the Wi-Fi in the office, but also connected internally to the network. So they were able to hop through and give it one more final effort. But we were able to repel them on that one. But there's been a lot. Others where, on a real technical level, they had malware that communicates out back to the threat actor, right? They have their backdoor. And what they realized is that the customer was in an incident response scenario. So instead of it just doing a normal check-in with that infrastructure of the adversary, what was waiting was the ransomware executable. So it was a pretty nifty way that they pulled that off using shellcode and changing the way that it's supposed to receive and execute normal commands. They just had the ransomware waiting. And so that was one that was really sped up.
Yeah. So for the folks out there that are listening, how long, I mean, normally people come into an organization and they lurk. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And they kind of go east to west. So how long are they typically in there for before they actually do something?
Yeah. So there's usually a change of hands, actually. So I think if you look at the enterprise as a whole, there's a lot of different skill sets and a lot of different roles. The criminal enterprise, right? There was one that was just taken down. There's like 150 people involved. And some of those individuals may not even be in the organization. They're essentially, think of them as a vendor, right? And we call them access brokers. So an access broker, their sole role often is to get perimeter access to an organization and then sell it. And that's all they're doing. They're not doing the ransomware attack. They're not doing the lateral movements. That may not even be within their fold as a skill set, right? So sometimes if a access broker gets access and then is trying to sell it, maybe they're not getting the offer they want, right? So they can sit there for months and months. Once that changes hands to the individual who's hands on keyboard, it varies. So they're off to the races sometimes within 2 hours, right? Often, I would say it's about a week to 2 weeks that they're kind of working their way through.
So if you've got the right tools in place, you can detect these folks. Am I accurate on that one?
Yeah. Like I said, we in just about every matter, we see detections that were fired off that nobody responded to. The best thing that I've walked into are the people who have that EDR, and even one with like full licensing, getting full command line processes, connections. And I just walk in and my job's so easy. Like, oh, look, within this tool, I have start to finish over the past 2 weeks. Every single command that they ran, when they ran it, how they did it, how they got it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that makes you. That was actually going to be one of my questions. Is how can the customers make life easier for you when you walk in the door?
Buy a great tool and don't look at it. I think having an incident response plan is the first action, right? Walking through tabletop scenarios, a fake ransomware scenario with your team and say, okay, step one, do this, step two, do this, and this is how we'd respond. This is our out-of-band communication that we would set up. This is who I'm going to escalate to. This is our messaging internally. This is who is going to handle, customer communications and employee communications. I think the incident response plan is the biggest thing, and then making sure that the audit logs are turned on. There's ones, Microsoft 365 used to have their logs disabled by default. That's changed, but there's still a lot of other components that are not enabled. So those configuration reviews, walking through, understanding that if you have everything, you're in a good position to forensically answer the questions around data theft, data exfil. That's the key.
I think I've seen a big difference in the last, X amount of years that, security used to be, yeah, we don't have the budget for that. Let's worry about it later. And then it becomes an issue. But I think that's changing. I think now people are trying to get ahead of the curve and say, hey, let's defend against this. Let's not wait till we get hit with ransomware or some type of a spoofing or phishing attack. Are you seeing the same thing? I mean, you do this every day. I don't. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
We walk in and ask, why didn't you look at this tool before? And they say that, well, we didn't have the budget. Look at the checkbooks post ransomware attack. You have the full attention. You have the executive team, the board ready to buy in because they realize going through that, they'd never, ever, ever want to do that again. And I hate that people have to learn their lesson that way.
Yeah.
But like I said, with small companies, it sometimes is a challenge. There is, financial issues there to support it. But being on that side where you don't have insurance, you don't have the tools to answer questions, or if you have to declare a massive data breach because you don't have the logs to determine if they took it. I've had cases where I truly, deep down at my core, do not think that the threat actor took, this much data. But if there's no logs, the way that some of these regulations are written, they have to declare it. And it's so unfortunate. I really hate that situation.
Yeah, I mean, having a blindfold on looking for this can't be a good feeling.
No.
Yeah.
And a lot do.
We'll end on that note. Max, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. This was good. I think I had a lot of good stories, and I think the listeners out there are really going to enjoy this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, that's a wrap for Business Brains and the Bottom Line. Until next time, this is Paul Delegro signing off.